Well, good morning, everybody. I know folks are just sort of getting set up here. Thank you for your patience. Of course, it wouldn't be Zoom in the COVID era without a few technical difficulties. So we're starting a few minutes behind schedule, but thank you very much for joining us. My name is Matt Youens. I'll be the MC for today's session. And there's just a few housekeeping items that we would like to go through prior to us getting everything underway. So I would just like to start things off by welcoming everybody to Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we do live, work, and play in the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. So the Siksika, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Itskia Nakota Nations, the Métis Nation for Region 3, and of course, all the people who make their homes here in Treaty 7 land. We would also like to take a moment to thank everybody, to thank all the frontline medical and support staff, the truckers, the grocery clerks, the cashiers, and to every other indispensable human being that's been helping to keep us safe and healthy during the COVID-19 pandemic. At some point, I'm very much going to be giving a big thank you to my barber. I'm looking forward to my first haircut in a while, so that will be fun. So today's community session is presented by Basic Income Calgary, as well as Enough for All. For those of you that aren't aware of who Basic Income Calgary is or what Basic Income Calgary is, it's an action group of the Basic Income Canada Network and an Enough for All stakeholder. Basic Income Calgary's goals align with Enough for All, Calgary's poverty reduction strategy, and the growing national movement for a basic income guarantee. We believe in and support the creation of a basic income guarantee program that would create a regular, predictable income universally and unconditionally available to all who need it, and sufficient to provide for a decent lifestyle and enable full participation in the community. So, the tech with Zoom. When you joined, your audio and your video was disabled. We will ask everybody to please ensure that your audio and video is disabled. And we're going to ask everybody to use the chat feature to ask any questions and to interact with one another. So please do go ahead and use the chat. So for those of you that aren't familiar, there's the chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom. And a bit of a pro tip, if you scroll over someone's image and you see the three dots, you can click on those three dots and you can hide non-video participants. So if you do that right now, you should only be seeing two people, myself, as well as our American Sign Language interpreter, Debra Russell. So there's an old IT proverb, because something will go wrong. So if you are having tech problems, you can use the raise hand feature. And one of our behind the scenes superstars, BIC IT Help Hajir Sale, will be with you to help. To raise your hand digitally, there is the participants button at the bottom, and then you can click raise hand. And if you get disconnected during this session, feel free to join the webinar by using the same URL that you access this webinar. So this webinar is being recorded. You should have seen a message already stating so, and it is going to be shared publicly. And copies of the slides with links will be made available to all who registered. So let's talk about inclusion for a second. This session does support American Sign Language as well as closed captioning. For those of you that asked for ASL support, using the scrolling over Debra's image, you can actually click on the three dots and say pin this interpreter or pin this person to your screen, and that way you'll always be able to see Debra, okay? And there's also closed captioning support. So there's quite a few of you that have requested closed captioning support. You'll see the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please make sure to click that and then show the subtitles. And these translation services are made possible by the Disability Action Hall, which is a community development project of the Calgary SCOPE Society. So thank you very much to the Action Hall. So the agenda for today, well, I've sort of done the welcome already. For those of you joining a little bit late, again, I'll be the MC for today. My name is Matt Youens, and I'm with Basic Income Calgary. We're going to be doing some workshops for about 35 minutes. We're doing two workshops, and they're actually happening at the exact same time. So There's going to be one group over in one workshop and one group over in the other. Unfortunately, you can't do both at the same time. So one of our workshops is Basic Income Fundamentals, where you get to learn about what are the building blocks of the basic income idea. And then we have a P.E.I Plus, where today you're going to be hearing Basic Income Calgary's response to School for Public Policy paper. We then have our keynote speaker, Todd Hirsch, who will be talking, and then we have our advocate guest joining us, and then we'll be closing out and doing a quick poll at the end. So enough with Matt talking, on with the workshops. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be inviting everybody in this call to join the P.E.I Fundamentals workshop. If that's where you want to go, you click join. If you want to stay in this channel and attend the P.E.I Plus workshop, you click later. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point, and I'm going to open the breakout room to everybody. And again, those are your options that you have to either join, so join the P.E.I Fundamentals, or to click later and you'll be going into the P.E.I Plus stream.
Well, thank you. Welcome to Basic Income Fundamentals, first and foremost. So we got three goals today for Basic Income Fundamentals. Our first one is to inform you guys about what basic income is. The second one is to engage you over this platform, which is new to me and probably new to all of us. And the third one is to actually help you guys build the confidence to talk about universal basic income. So first off, we're going to talk about our Basic Income's Calgary's guiding principles. So the first one that we've designed these a couple years back to help us help people get an idea of what basic income should really be. So our first one is universal. So a universal basic income should be available to anyone and everyone who is falling below a certain income with no behavioral eligibility. So that being said, it's for anybody who needs it, essentially. The second one is it's adequate, and it should be set at a level that is decent and enables full participation in a community. The third one is an individual. And the individual part of this, it allows for a basic income on an individual basis. So regardless of your family size or household income, the level of payment should be based on that. A complementary, we have so much available to us in regards to affordable housing, childcare, dental care, prescriptions, and other programs that address the well-being of an individual, and our social support programs around the city. So this doesn't mean, though, that government should not improve in them or invest in other programs. It should be a way or a justification for encroaching on labor rights and regulations that already exist, like existing commitments to minimum wage. The basic income should just be complementary and a part of the well-rounded support system. A basic income should not negatively impact either those people who are experiencing poverty. A basic income shouldn't reduce social assisted payments. So by allowing those who are currently on AISH or Alberta Works to be penalized. So now we're going to talk about myths. The government cannot afford a basic income. So the province of Alberta is already spending about $7.1 to $9.5 billion on poverty. Oops, I think it's so sensitive. The estimate cost on the Canadian healthcare system is about $7.6 billion in poverty. So the combined cost of all this stuff is there's no way, shape, or form less than costing the cost of a basic income. So myth number 2, if you give people money for nothing, they will not work. So a basic income provides the basics for people, while working will give them more money. So a basic income, like as we mentioned, that it is complementary to the broader social support system, strengthens social safety, the safety net throughout our community. Basic income also will recognize some of the barriers to work and the ability to essentially, when we have to redefine how we work and what work means to us, and how the labor market is more than just putting in, putting out. And what work looks like for some people looks like different for others. So basic income, if we give it to them, they're going to just spend it on alcohol and drugs. Now, this, as we know, is a myth, because people spend it on money, education, their money on education, schools, on computer equipment, on all different other things like food, childcare, and recreation. So there are individuals with certain mental health concerns, but that has, and addiction does play a role in that. But financial stress that is currently, that the current income support programs have we want to alleviate that, because that in and of itself can just create more mental health problems. So income security programs like old age, so they spend their money wisely and in their neighborhoods. So myth number 4, anyone who wants to work can work. So jobs at risk are increasingly jobs in Canada are increasingly at risk for automation. So they say about 50% of the Canadian workforce is about to lose their job because of this. Low-paying low-paying retail and wholesale trade jobs are now leading the employment sector in Alberta's economy. And 1 in 5 Albertans work part-time. So this is interesting, because I took this information from the labor force statistics from Stats Canada, and I also found out that like oil and gas is shrinking about by 12%. And these wholesale jobs, like they're working in warehouses and low-paying retail jobs, those are the jobs that are actually at risk for automation, believe it or not. And a lot of those jobs aren't kind of going to come back. So as we move forward, a basic income, the role that it's going to play is going to be very, very important. So also, when we talk about work, as I mentioned, we have to talk about many people cannot work because of their health or abilities. So it's, like I said, when we define work, we are implementing our own lens on what we think work should be. And for a lot of people, they're not able to do that. So why do we need a basic income? So this is Robert Reich, who is an economist out of the United States, who was the former Secretary of Labor under the Clinton administration. And he's been putting a lot of work into why we need a basic income. And I'm going to show a brief video. So as mentioned, rising inequality. So Alberta is one of the wealthiest provinces, yet has one of the highest levels of income inequality. So what affects one of us affects all of us. So when incomes are closer to equal, our communities are better, we have better mental health, we have better physical health, we have more education, we have both richer and stronger communities. We also know that basic income can lead to a better distribution of income and wealth across the board. But this is like, it needs to change, where we need to stop attributing one's worth to society into how they earn money. And as an individual's income does not always need to be linked to that job, we need to start looking at the person as a whole, who is a part of a larger community. A basic income will increase resiliency by allowing the individual the ability to prosper without being denied their basic needs to survive. This then becomes that much needed layer to these increasingly inadequate social security nets that we have throughout our society.
Ben, we have 3 minutes left.
Oh, whoa. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, healthier people, healthier communities. So when money is not a factor, do people live healthier lives? Yes. Income and health are directly tied to one another. So income has a greater role in our overall well-being than genetics, lifestyle, or having the ability to visit doctors. So when we build capacity throughout the lifespan, there's that constant challenge of financial insecurity, you know what, that all those health problems that arise in the present and in the future, they tend to just evaporate. Well, hopefully the idea is they evaporate. But as mentioned, this basic income does not solve all health related issues, but it does provide that necessary breathing room. So having a secure source of income allows people to purchase healthy food and direct access to reasonable housing. So that complementary part of that social security system is that's where that comes in. So the future of work. So work as we know this has fundamentally changed. And with that 50% of jobs being obsolete, artificial intelligence is rapidly increasing and fewer workers are needed to create more and more production. This is not a necessarily new concept though, because because we take a look at like something like the cotton ginny that sparked the Industrial Revolution, or as some of you probably can remember, the telephone operator. Those jobs are always evolving. And it goes, for those people who are unemployed or underemployed, basic income helps them out, but it also goes much further. And it can allow a single parent to stay home and provide for their child. It can help that child help care for their parent. So when you take a look at the local level, it can help artisans work on their creative aspects of their life without struggling with trying to find money. You can have the entrepreneur take a risk, or you can also get someone to volunteer and find new meaning in their community. And it adds that layer of security that's flexible for life's moments. Now, government programs with less and less people in the workforce, that puts pressure on governments, like, because they're not getting revenue putting into something like E.I. or old age security, and cutting social programs is only going to increase disparity further. So we need to place pressure on the collective responsibility to contribute back in order to ensure this well-being of the population. So the human rights aspect of a basic income is that these inadequate social supports that are currently around, like Alberta Works and AISH, continue to penalize those who are unable to look for work. And also anybody who makes any more additional income, especially on AISH, you get clawbacks. And those clawbacks really keep people in that poverty trap. And it doesn't allow the social workers working within Alberta Supports to focus on building rapport where the individual is at in their life. So with these current income supports programs providing barely enough, additional resources become really hard, and like I said, keeping those people in poverty. Basic income then becomes a bridge to access greater resources in the community. And it not only provides for the basic needs, but it's intended to really create a quality of life that allows for a greater participation across society. I think that's 3 minutes. So the question I want to ask you guys is, and you can ask other people or just something to think about, is what does a basic income bring to the kind of society that you want to have?
So if people could put in the chat and we can read out your comments. We only have 3 minutes left. So Greg says equality.
This participant.
And Eleanor Reed says, a CEO at Plan Canada makes $250K per year. This money could go directly to those in need. dignity, security, and a sense of safety.
Yes, absolutely.
No one is forgotten and left behind, a home, equity, the ability to leave a difficult living situation. Choices for abused immigrant women.
That one's fantastic. Absolutely.
Who can't speak English.
So I had this scheduled with Brad to talk to him. Brad is a recipient of he's on the old age disability, and he was a former ACE recipient, but I think we're going to have to cut that short. Unfortunately, I was really looking forward to that. And then, is there any questions from you guys?
So just before we get some questions, that Pam says the ability to do the work you are good at and love instead of what pays you enough. We are totally dependent on the abuser. The ability to earn and spend money on education, culture, not just basic needs. The ability to pay health care. And a very good presentation, Ben.
I tried my best, given the circumstances. This is really awkward for me because I'm used to giving this in front of like human beings, not my computer screen.
What are the chances of implementation in Alberta before we go? We have 6
Eleanor, that's a great question. I actually think it's very possible because we already have so many income support programs that are all over the place in the province, and that basic income kind of fills those gaps within that. And why are we only focusing on this population and that population? So like the Child Benefit Act, age, old age security. So with the UCPs, I think it's even more of a chance because those guys are always looking to save money. And basic income does save money, I truly believe. And it comes from it's a fiscally conservative idea from Milton Friedman. And so when he brought it up in that sense of things. So my question be, how is best to explain this? So that's an interesting question. I think that those opposed to basic income need to take a better look at the income supports that are currently happening in this province. So we are already spending money on income supports, and something like Alberta Works is giving very, very, very little. And it's like I've mentioned, it's keeping people in that poverty trap. And what does that do to something like the economy, something like our community, something like our healthcare system? That and just get those people thinking about that and that cost of poverty. Which
so
parties?
It's now 10:50 and some people need to go to see Todd.
Okay.
Thanks, Matt. Welcome everyone to Basic Income Plus. My name is Lee Stevens, and I'll be talking about a research report titled "An American Guaranteed Base in Alberta." Guaranteed Basic Income Issues and Options. I work at Vibrant Communities Calgary as a public policy coordinator. And if you'll just bear with me here while I get my notes. So we have about 35 minutes, so I'll spend about half that time talking about the research. I'll talk about Basic Income Calgary's response to the research, and I'll try and leave plenty of time for questions and answers. I should also mention that Kurt Archer is in the background, and he's taking note of everyone's questions. So that's my favorite part of the presentation. So as I go along, if a question pops up, feel free to write it in the chat, and we'll go through that later. Okay, so although VCC is a member of the Social Policy Collaborative, I work at VCC. I'm not an economist, but I was involved in supporting the research. I did have an opportunity to meet with the authors and some of the researchers at the School of Public Policy when this report was being developed, and I was involved in writing the published response. So the Calgary Social Policy Collaborative is a group of 40 community organizations working together to inform the development of public policy that improves the well-being for all Albertans. So 11 organizations, their logo seen here, pooled resources last year around this time to financially support the work of researchers at the School of Public Policy. So this research I'll be discussing is the second of 2 reports supported through this research partnership. Okay. So I'll just be talking a little bit about the authors. Wayne Simpson is participating in this webinar. Thank you, Wayne, and he'll be available afterwards to help answer questions. Wayne Simpson is a research fellow at the School of Public Policy. He's a professor in the Department of Economics at the University of Manitoba. He's published extensively on economics and social policy, including recent research with Harvey Stevens on refundable tax credits. Harvey Stevens is a retired senior policy analyst with the Department of Family Services and Housing within the Government of Manitoba. During his 19-year career, he managed major evaluations and policy analysis related to low income and families and children.
Lee, I do apologize.
Oh, yes.
Late breaking news. Due to technical difficulties, what we're going to have to do is we're closing the basic income fundamentals room.
Oh, okay.
Everyone will be joining this session again, and then we're going to reopen them. So I do apologize for interrupting.
No, that's fine. I apologize to the people that wanted the Basic Income 101. This presentation wasn't intended for people that didn't have a foundational knowledge for basic income. But I'm still open to answering any and all questions at the end. So both authors, Harvey Stevens and Wayne Simpson, have published extensively on basic income. I'd encourage you guys to just Google their names. In 2017, they published a report that explains how a federal basic income program and a federal provincial basic income could be funded by converting select non-refundable tax credits into the revenue base for a partial basic income. And so that research, titled Towards a National Basic Income, provided a base for the Alberta paper. Okay. So now for the fun part. So we're talking about the research, a feasibility of a basic income program for Alberta, published in April of 2019. So we have about 15 minutes. I'm going to talk high level about this research, but I really encourage everyone to read the report for themselves. So the report, An Alberta Guaranteed Basic Income, explains how a guaranteed basic income could be achieved in Alberta by revising the existing provincial tax system and turning 6 existing non-refundable tax credits into a single refundable credit. We always hear the question, a basic income sounds great, but how would we ever afford it? Well, this model doesn't necessitate significant new funding or an increase to income tax rates. This particular model would result in an annual guaranteed income of $6,389 for one adult and $9,305 for families with 2 adults. Single parent families, as well as singles and elderly people, really benefit from this proposal. Nearly 40% of Albertan families will see their incomes increase as a result. Income inequality, as measured by the Gini coefficient, is reduced through this proposal. Specifically, the following tax credits would be deleted to finance the basic income. That would include the basic personal amount, the age credit, the pension credit, the education credit, the tuition, and the student loan interest credit, pardon me, for a total of about $5.36 billion. So for single people, this is a group that's often missed by social policy reform. They experience a substantial improvement to their disposable income. So the depth of poverty, so that's how much a person's income falls below the poverty line, is reduced by 27%. The incidence, or the number of people that fall below the poverty line, is reduced by 16%. There would also be top-ups for people with disabilities. So if it's combined with a federal program, so this model would include all of the 6 refundable tax credits that I previously mentioned, as well as the GST credit. That would result in an annual income for a single person of $13,674 and about $19,000 for a family with 2 adults. The federal provincial combined model would reduce income poverty by 44% and eliminate income poverty, according to LICO, after tax for single parents, couples without dependents, and the elderly. Among singles, poverty would decrease by more than 1/3, and for two-parent families by about 2/3. With the federal provincial combined model, income inequality falls by 2.2%, and income inequality falls by 32% for single parent families. So they really benefit from this proposal as well. This proposed Alberta Guaranteed Basic Income doesn't replace existing income support programs. Although it should be noted that the authors had contemplated a third option that replaces social assistance, they ran into problems with the simulation model because it didn't distinguish between people on income support that had barriers to employment or were expected to work, and it didn't distinguish between people who are on AISH, so assured income for the severely handicapped. So the proposed basic income would exist alongside current social assistance support, as well as important refundable tax credits like the Alberta Child Benefit and what was previously the carbon levy rebate that's no longer there. This proposal does not have a significant impact on labor. To achieve this model, it proposes a benefit reduction rate of 10% for any employment earned, allowing people to keep more of their benefit while they work. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to Basic Income Calgary's response to the research. So after the research was published last year, members of the Social Policy Collaborative and Basic Income Calgary collaborated and published a response to the research. So I'll talk about some of the key takeaways from that response. So by maintaining existing supports, we recognize that those who didn't file their taxes or whose income drastically changed over the course of the year would still have access to social assistance. So that was important. Although the authors contemplated an option that replaces social assistance, some of us were disappointed that the model didn't feature a standalone guaranteed basic income. One of the benefits of basic income is that it simplifies income support. The current income support system is incredibly complex and bureaucratic. So we were really hoping for a model that replaced that. I should mention, though, that our friends at the School of Public Policy pointed out that this criticism can be easily addressed by doing an automatic fill of people's tax forms. And apparently the CRA can easily do this. Dr. Lindsay Tedds at the School of Public Policy published an excellent trend report on the merits of automatic tax filing, which goes into this in more detail. Something I learned actually is 1/3 of people on income support don't file their taxes, which is really unfortunate because they're the group of people that needs these tax benefits more than anyone. Also in the response, we shared that by proposing a basic income that is complementary rather than a replacement, the authors make an implicit statement that the comprehensive system of social services, labor regulations like minimum wage, and public and community-based programs are needed to also address the many dimensions of poverty. At the same time, the authors acknowledge that the social assistance system is inadequate in its current form, and they recommend modifications if this basic income were to be implemented, and we agreed with that, of course. We really liked that this proposed model would diminish the welfare wall by allowing people to earn more employment income and keep more of their benefits than what is the current standard for social assistance. So right now, people on income support have the option to top up their income by working. There's a limit of $230 a month. After they reach that limit, they can only keep 25% of their benefit. Another way of saying that is that their benefit is reduced at a rate of 75%. The earning exemption amount really should have been raised when the minimum wage was raised, because right now with the minimum wage at $15 an hour, there's little benefit to people on income support working more than 15 hours a month before their benefit is clawed back to zero, leaving them barely at the poverty line. By comparison, the proposed model has a modest benefit reduction rate of only 10%, allowing people the opportunity to earn more while continuing to receive assistance. With any basic income proposal, trade-offs exist between reducing income poverty, limiting work disincentives. The authors noted in their proposal that by applying the 10% benefit reduction rate, it has a limited impact on labor supply. This proposal does not fulfill the adequacy principle of basic income. It fails to eliminate income poverty for non-elderly singles, even if they do experience the most benefit of all family groups, and two-parent families with children. Members were also concerned about the redistributive impacts, as the cost of the program would fall disproportionately in terms of percentage of income to taxpayers in the middle. I should point out that the vast majority of taxpayers are middle class, so that's true of any expenditure. If this basic income were to be implemented, we recommended that government look at measures to ensure fair distributional impact. So changes to our tax system that places a greater onus on higher income earners while lessening the burden on the middle income earners than is the case under this existing proposal. But I would like to thank the authors for looking into the feasibility of a basic income for Alberta. We think it identifies a reasonable pathway to actually implementing a basic income for Alberta. So we're going to move on to questions now, and I've provided the link to the research as well as my email address if anyone wants to follow up with any questions over email. And now I'm going to rely on Kurt to unmute Wayne, and let's get into some questions.
Great, a couple of questions for you off the bat here. The first one being, why did they use LICO AT as the comparison?
Just one, I'm going to answer that, but can you see if Wayne is in the room? I just want to see if he's able to talk.
Can you hear me?
Oh,
can you hear
hi
me?
Wayne. Oh, wonderful. Yes, I hear you. Okay, great.
I unmuted myself. I'm not very good at this, but I'm have some experience.
Oh, this is great. I can hear you perfectly. Okay, so this question that Kurt just asked, why did you use LICO instead of the MBM? Because I've heard a couple people ask that question, and Ron made it. I asked Ron at the School of Public Policy, and he sort of said that you didn't have the data to do MBM, but can you explain that a bit better?
No, you mentioned a couple of things that are missing, things like the climate action incentive, and
Yes.
indeed what is missing, and this is quite important. What is here are the Canada Child Benefits, because this is done on 2015 data. So now that this is the report is a couple of years old, and it was done on earlier data as the data comes out. So done on 2015 data, the model we're using, which is the SPSDM from Statistics Canada, wasn't yet equipped to do the market basket measure. It is now.
Oh, the simulation model wasn't
again,
equipped to do the
that.
MBM.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now we would use the MBM because it's now the official poverty line. But the LICO AT had been the standard for a very long time up until then, and it was the standard we had been using for the national study as well.
Excellent, thank you. Kurt, next question.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So given that the levels are really low, what if a partial general basic income was proposed by policymakers or even the federal government? What would the BIC's stance take?
What would Basic Income Calgary's stance be?
Yes. What would Basic Income Calgary stance be if a partial Alberta general basic income was proposed by policymakers or even the federal government?
I think we would have to apply it to Basic Income Calgary's principles. And I know that Matt is going to be getting into that after this presentation. I mean, that depends on so many factors because we would have to see where it aligns with 5 of Basic Income Calgary's principles. And then we would go from there. But I know that we had a brief discussion about what do we mean by an adequate benefit. And I think that would be one that raised people at least to the poverty line.
Great. We have another question here. The majority of the population, so does the majority of the population lose their personal deduction and therefore pay more taxes?
Yep, I think that's right. Is that correct, Wayne?
The personal deduction, the basic personal amount is the major part, is about 60% of the entire refundable credit that is converted to a refundable credit. So they they lose the deduction, but of course those who have lower incomes than them get the benefit, and that is where primarily where the class income earners pay more is because they lose these deductions.
Yeah, so you lose the tax credits, but you gain a basic income and all the benefits that come from that.
Yeah, the redistributive aspect of it is precisely that you're moving from a system where some people do not receive benefits, which are those people who don't have any taxable income or low taxable income, to a system where those people receive benefits, and some of that is at the expense of others who have received more benefit from the non-refundable credit system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks,
Great.
Wayne. Go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah. How does the paperwork work for individuals and family use and seniors? How does the paperwork get done for individuals and family use and seniors?
Yeah, go ahead, Wayne.
Well, we were calling this a basic income because it does a great deal of what you would hope a basic income would do redistributively. And we've talked in the other paper in here about how it captures the benefits or the lack of benefits that are associated with singles and couples without children and so on. So in that sense, it's a more universal set of coverage. But what it really is a tax change. That is to say, this isn't a standalone basic income program. And you know, some of the warts in the system are precisely that. They're reflective of the warts in the system. But one of the advantages of it is that it's administered by the existing tax system. So when you say, you know, how is it administered? What are the definitions of family? So on and so forth. They conform to the existing tax code, unless in the system we choose to change that, but we haven't done that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Awesome.
I think of it more as, you know, it's a tax change, but it's kind of a thought experiment. What if we actually made these non-refundable credits refundable? What would we do? Well, the answer is we would make quite a big contribution towards what people would consider a more appropriate basic income for Albertans.
Yeah, it's an incredible opportunity, I think. Go ahead, Kurt.
You did not talk about the demeaning aspect of our social system. Having to ask and qualify and risk getting turned down. Isn't this a major reason for having a high enough basic income to not need other social assistance?
Yeah, and this is something I actually wanted to ask you as well, Wayne, because you alluded to the modifications would need to be done to the current social assistance system, and I wanted to see if you could elaborate on that a bit more.
Well, the only thing someone would have to do to receive the benefits that we're talking about in terms of what we're calling a basic income is they would have to file a tax return. And more and more people are filing returns because other benefits like now the Canada Child Benefit as well as others are associated with that. So there's been a big push to make sure that everyone files a tax return. So that would continue, and they would have to file a tax return. The stigmatizing part is really the current social assistance system. There's nothing to prevent a province, for example, from saying we're going whole hog into refundable tax credits as our system of cash payments to low-income people. They could do that, and they could eliminate or modify in any way they saw fit their social assistance system. We think that over time, provinces that are serious about addressing poverty and dealing with the emergency situations would look carefully at their system and how it integrates with the system of refundable tax credits. And that offers an opportunity to have a bigger impact along the lines of a grander basic income.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I noticed in my research was there's no cost benefit to delivering cash conditionally versus unconditionally. And we know that it costs more to deliver income support with all these conditions. There's an administrative cost to it. And you also have to hire all of these system navigators to help people navigate the system. And that costs money too. I know a lot of social workers are employed to do just this.
Yeah. My view is that the cash should be distributed by CRA, and certain services should be distributed at the provincial level by these people who now do this.
Yeah.
And do it well.
Yeah.
Maybe not as many of them are needed. That could be a concern, because they wouldn't be pushing cash out the door, but they would be doing the things that they're probably best trained to do.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But we didn't want to step on the province's toes on social assistance.
Okay.
That's a bit of a prickly issue. So our thought experiment is simply, hey, what if you simply change the tax arrangements towards something that is closer to what the optimal tax literature actually suggests we should be doing anyway?
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear if the provinces would object to that. You think it would be maybe kind of nice to have the federal government take this out of their hands and just deliver income support? I don't know. This is just a thought I'm just putting out there.
Well, of course, sorry, I was just going to say, contrary to a lot of current discussion, I don't think an emergency situation like we now face is the time to construct a basic income. But once we're back to something resembling normalcy, the federal government could convene a federal provincial meeting on welfare, basic income, whatever you wanted to call it, and they could make a proposal along the lines that they've done on other things, such as the Canada Child Benefit, which came out of the National Child Benefit Initiative. It essentially federal, provincial, where the feds put money on the table with guidelines, and the provinces bought into it.
I think, yeah, I would agree with that as well. And I know some people have been using the term crisis basic income, and I struggle with that because it kind of means that it might end. And that's what worries me is we want a permanent basic income program. So if we have to wait till after the crisis to develop that, because it is very complicated, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and we don't want it to be designed in a hurry and badly designed.
Totally, exactly.
Take the time, get this right, get the provinces on board, and right, and that is very hard to do in the current environment. In fact, you can't. We've seen the CERB and the problems it has created. And that's an example of a program that was designed to shovel money out the door quickly and present problems as we try to return to some sort of normalcy.
Yeah, definitely. Kurt, keep on going. Is there a lot of questions, Kurt?
Yeah, we got a few more to go here.
Okay.
So yeah, and it's kind of in addition to that one. What are the potential impact of families and individuals needing to use food banks and other services?
I'll let Wayne answer too, but I just want to jump in and say, I think that there's been so much research done. I mean, Lynn McIntyre has done a lot of research on food insecurity and income being really the root cause of that. And really the solution to food insecurity is not food banks, it's income. So there's a wealth of evidence to say that food bank usage would go down if people had more income to meet their basic needs. But Wayne, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, one of the foundations of the market basket measure is indeed ensuring that people have enough money to buy what's considered a nutritional food basket. And that is one of the incentives to provide cash to families to allow them to deal with the basic needs.
And James McCara, he's the CEO of the Calgary Food Bank. He told me an interesting story about the Ralph Bucks back in the early 2000s. Does anyone remember getting $400 from the provincial government? Food bank usage drastically went down when people got the Ralph Bucks. And so the food bank noticed it right away. I just found that an interesting story. And I'm sure that's across Canada as well.
Yeah, food bank is generally not particularly conveniently located because there's only one or two of them in a city. And secondly, it is still, I think, seen to be somewhat stigmatizing. So the detriments that existing social assistance has.
Okay, Kurt, go ahead.
Yeah. Would the credit be paid out in lump sums or monthly payments?
Oh, it would have to be at least monthly. All of the basic income experiments, the payments were monthly to conform to social assistance, existing social assistance, Social Security in the U.S. It could be done more frequently than that. There's no reason why not, because CRA now, they've not gone down to monthly payments for things like the Canada Child Benefit, but I think the standard is sort of a monthly payment.
I think that other pilots that I've looked at, the success of the basic income pilots has been that predictability of income. Because if you get a lump sum, there might not be money tomorrow. So who knows what you're going to spend it on. But if you know you're going to get a certain amount every month, you can start to predict and budget. And I think it's just going to be much more successful that way.
And one of the big payments is housing, shelter, rent, whatever you want to call it. And that is typically a monthly thing.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you think certain provinces would benefit and should implement a basic income because of economic changes? For instance, what we're faced with in Alberta?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the gist of that question.
I believe it's about the tied to the economic changes. And so in Alberta's case, since our economy is also hit in
Sure.
addition to COVID, would we benefit more from having a basic income?
Well, in the sense that there would be a better established floor for people who fell, yes. It's hard to predict how that would affect the oil industry, which is the big drop, long-term drop, I think. There are other supports. This would be a long-term permanent support of the sort that, say, employment insurance is not. And it would be more generous than social assistance is now.
Mm-hmm.
What is the likelihood?
Sorry, just to add to that, there have been a lot of links of the unemployment caused by accelerating technology and precarious employment and so on to basic incomes. And then one of the basic this is one of the arguments for a basic income is that it will provide a floor where people are displaced out of jobs.
From what I understand, the oil and gas industry is automating as well. They're replacing people with machines, just like any other sector, any other industry. So I definitely think a basic income would help in Alberta, and it would give people the freedom to get retrained. They can go back to school and train to be something else if they want.
Yeah, one argument is that it provides a transition phase. It supports with income a transition phase for people who need to move from one type of employment to another.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be integrated with we have a training benefit in the tax system as well, which also could be integrated with it.
Man, we have a lot of non-refundable tax credits in Alberta.
It is really the growing pattern. The biggie, of course, is the basic personal amount, because Alberta's basic personal amount is the biggest by far in the country.
Yeah.
That provides a substantial foundation. So this was one of the intriguing aspects of this job to us. Harvey and I were interested in looking at Alberta specifically because they have such a large basic personal amount, basic personal deduction to work from in terms of establishing a basic income. So, for example, in our province, Manitoba, the impact would be less because our basic personal amount is almost only about half what Alberta's is.
Wow. That's so interesting.
And like that too.
Yeah. Huh.
But it still has an impact, as we showed in our national paper. I mean, it has an impact right across the country, but it would have a bigger impact in provinces with bigger deductions to work with.
Okay, we've got about three more questions here. We got 3 minutes to get through them. So,
okay.
Let's try and get through what we can here. So, what do you guys think we're at in terms of Alberta and Canada in terms of adoption of a basic income, and has this changed drastically since COVID?
Oh, has it changed since COVID? I really don't know. There's a lot of discussion about basic income, and I think this offers an opportunity in the future to address the question, in a proper fashion once COVID is dealt with, assuming that ever happens. But who can say what the pattern holds?
Mm-hmm.
The pattern that's been established is the pattern that the Liberal government has established. One, the Canada Child Benefit to address child poverty, and two, the anti-poverty strategy, along with the basic market basket measure to measure poverty, and the establishment of poverty goals. Because in order to achieve those goals, they're going to have to look at the areas that they're missing, which is families without children and single individuals. And that's going to lead them, I think, towards the kind of features like a refundable tax credits that we advocate.
I think that we're a few steps away from reforming and modifying our social assistance program before we get to a basic income. For instance, the earning exemption rate, that absolutely has to be raised. Because that's going to enable more people to work, and that's aligned with our current government. And so it's little patchwork modifications to the social assistance system, with the North Star being a basic income eventually, because I think there's a real cost benefit to it. And the evidence is overwhelming. And I think more and more policymakers are realizing this. So that's my thoughts on that one.
Great. Okay, so we got 1 minute left and a few questions here. There's one about rent, and housing rent is high for low-income families paying more than half rent income on rent and utilities. And what stops landlords from raising rent when income improves?
Well, this I suppose is an issue, and it would be reflected in the market basket measure as it was revised year to year, and that would be reflected presumably in the poverty measure. So poverty would go up if that happened.
Yeah, and I think this just points to the need for a comprehensive system of social services. Income just addresses one dimension of poverty. So you would still need regulations and things like that. So no, this model, doesn't prevent landlords from raising rents, but other regulations do, and that's why we need them.
Yeah, there are rent regulations, but some people get around them as well. So
yeah, I know. Well, those are the things we need to fix.
Yeah.
Okay,
that's
and last
going problem.
And last question, as people are starting to fill in from the other group here, where does the money come from from the government?
For our proposal, it comes from other taxpayers. It comes from middle income and higher income taxpayers, and it's fairly widely distributed across those groups. You could argue that the government, when it has additional funds, could introduce tax cuts to those groups to soften the blow, and I would advocate that, particularly for the middle income groups. But there's no magic bullet here. The money is coming from a redistributive effects across the tax system. And one way to interpret that is a lot of people have benefited from non-refundable credits that, if they had been refundable, wouldn't have had all those benefits.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Do we need to leave this room, Kurt, or do we just stay here?
We just stay right here. Yeah, I think we're all back in now. So
okay, great.
Hand it over
we'll take it over to Matt.
Lee, thank you so much. Ben and Colleen and everybody that was in the breakout session for Basic Income Fundamentals, thank you so much for your time and patience. I believe the plan is that we'll make sure that there is a full recording of Ben up on, we'll make it available on our website, and we will be now moving on to Todd Hirsch. I would like to introduce Todd Hirsch. Todd Hirsch is Vice President and Chief Economist at ATB Financial. He has multiple degrees here from Alberta. And while he does not describe himself as an economist who focuses specifically on the concept of basic income, he is an economist with an eye towards rising inequality within our society, and an economist that likes to take a look at particular tools or mechanisms available to help address that. So if I could please have everybody welcome Todd Hirsch to your screens. So Todd, if you wouldn't mind joining us, thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Matt. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and I will turn the stage over to you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Matt, for inviting me to be part of this. I've enjoyed the conversation enormously already. I apologize why I'm looking so orange on my video. I look like an Oompa Loompa or something like that, or I've been to Donald Trump's salon. but my skin is actually not this orange. But anyway, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here. Now, I do have to, Matt, you were saying sort of in the introduction, I want to reiterate, I am not an expert on a universal basic income or a basic income, guaranteed income. Not like some of the other experts that are on the line, especially the academics like Wayne Simpson. I saw Ron Kneebone's name pop up in the question. There's a lot of people on this call who will know way more about this topic than I ever will. But I'm really interested in this topic. And as an economist, I'm interested, I know just enough about it to get myself into trouble on the topic. How's that? And I have to say from the outset, you know, I'm a little bit on the fence about a universal basic income. I'm not yet convinced, in fact, for some of the reasons that I'll talk about, but I'm not yet convinced. But when I sit on the fence and I look on either side of the fence, I do look on the side of the fence that would propose a universal basic income, because I see this other side of the fence, which is do nothing. The status quo system is inadequate. And as an economist, I am increasingly concerned about income disparity. I think this is one of the biggest challenges the global economy faces and has been facing over the last 20 or 30 years. And we're now starting to see what happens when income disparity continues to grow, when that gap of income and opportunity continues to grow, and you get all kinds of really interesting and in some ways unpleasant political results. So I am interested in addressing income disparity, and I think a UBI is maybe one way to go about doing it. A couple of the reasons why I'm interested, or at least I'm attracted to the idea of a UBI. One is for the very reason that it's not means tested. And I know for some people, this is actually their objection to it. This idea that, well, you know, so-and-so might not need $1,000 a month, and so-and-so might be more needier and need that money in a bigger way. Actually, I like the idea that this isn't means tested, because once we start going down that alley of trying to figure out who is deserving and who is maybe not deserving, we're never ever going to solve that problem. And we're going to spend an enormous amount of energy and time and money in bureaucratic complications trying to figure out who is deserving and who is not deserving. So I really like the idea. I think that's one of its attractions to me, is that it's not means tested. In some ways, why should we even care or worry ourselves about, you know, if someone is deserving of it or not? Everyone gets it. That's the simplicity that really appeals to me. The other part of it that I'm curiously interested in, and it appeals to me, is that it attracts people from both ends of the political spectrum. The social progressives and the more left-wing leaning parties, you know, they view a UBI as a way of addressing poverty and income support in a more humane, in a more dignified way. Give people money and don't put them through all these degrading, you know, hoops that they have to jump through, these bureaucratic hoops and all these forms and applications, and just give people money and let them live in a way of deserving respect and in a way that is more humane. The other end, you know, the right-wing perspective, they see this ultimately as a way of really streamlining government spending. By introducing a UBI, you would be able to get rid of massive amounts of government spending on programs, all kinds, you know, myriad of programs, whole bureaucratic departments would be closed down immediately. You know, that they see this as a way of actually reducing spending and reducing the size of government. In fact, this is one of the reasons why Milton Friedman, a very right-wing market-oriented economist, you know, used to advocate for a universal basic income as a way of streamlining. No, so both ends of the spectrum, they're attracted to it for very, very different reasons. But I do think it's a way you could at least start to engage politicians in a conversation about what it would look like. Because at the end of the day, I mean, you know, you can argue whatever you want, but if there's no practical way that politicians are going to engage in the conversation, it's just kind of hot air. So in this case, I think there's at least a starting point where both ends of a political spectrum might engage in a conversation on it. But when I talk about, I give a lot of presentations and I often throw out the idea of a universal basic income as something that maybe we should start talking about more seriously. I do get lots of people, some angry people, in fact, objecting to it. And I've lumped the objections to it into sort of three main areas. And now, again, these aren't necessarily my objections to it, but those who are opposed to it, generally their arguments fall in one of three areas. The first area of objection is simply, we can't afford this. We will be bankrupt as a company in 20 minutes if we even start, if we go down this alley of a UBI. But that's sort of like saying, asking somebody, a typical person or a household, can you afford a vacation? Well, you can afford some kind of vacation, but it depends on what vacation you're talking about. Are you talking about a month in Bora Bora? Or are you talking a weekend at West Edmonton Mall? I mean, they're very different ideas of a vacation. But certainly you would be able to come up with some kind of vacation that would fit your budget, that is not going to bankrupt you as a household. And I think a UBI, when we're talking about this provincially or nationally, it's the same thing. Of course, we would be able to afford some version of a UBI. The question is, what kind of version is that going to look like? And that, of course, is where the conversation and the debate would begin. It might mean that we have to get rid of more than just a few tax credits. It might mean we have to end some other programs of income support. It might mean some taxes might have to go up. But the way you design that, I don't want to get into the weeds too much on that. I think Wayne and Lee talked a little bit about that. It's all in the program that you want, but I reject the idea that simply to say we can't afford it, so let's stop talking about it. Of course we can afford some kind of program, and we should explore that. The second main area that people will object to it, and I have to confess, I do have a little bit of sympathy for this one. This idea that if you give people money to do nothing, we shouldn't be surprised if they sit around and do nothing. This idea, this worry that a UBI would kill ambition, especially among young people. Are we in some ways giving young people too easy a way out of life, where maybe they don't have to choose what they want to do in life? They don't, maybe if they're not academically inclined, maybe if they've struggled and the idea of any kind of post-secondary training doesn't appeal to them at all. Are we giving them too easy a way out to just say, I'm just going to drop out of life, I'm going to collect my UBI and sit around and do nothing? I don't know. I mean, this is where we really need more pilot projects, like the one in Ontario would have been fantastic had it not been terminated. But as an economist, here's where I would like to see more data and more evidence that, in fact, we don't see this. Part of me, I mean, the generous part of me rejects the idea that humans are fundamentally lazy. And that's what this argument rests on. It rests on the idea that given the choice, every single one of us would do nothing but sit on the couch and eat potato chips or smoke weed or whatever it is we're going to do. I actually don't believe that's true at all. It might be true for some people, but those people are going to be lazy regardless of the system that we have in place. And there's maybe not much we can do about that. But I reject this notion that everybody is fundamentally lazy. Now, a lot of this goes back to, economists, we're kind of culpable in this. If you go back a few hundred years, when you start to look at some of those early models that around labor economics, they would talk about work versus leisure time. Now, we have to remember that a lot of these economists were putting these models together, a couple hundred years ago, when in fact work was miserable, absolutely unbearable. I mean, they'd be talking about people shoveling coal in a coal mine or working in machine shops or, out in a field with a hoe, like absolutely miserable work. I don't think anybody 200 years ago would have described their work as fulfilling. And this gives me purpose and meaning. Fast forward to 2020, and I think a lot of people in Canada, not everyone for sure, but I think a lot of people would say, well, yeah, I actually like my job. Sure, I might like a holiday every now and then, and I really like the weekend when it comes, but my job gives me some personal fulfillment. It gives me a sense of contribution to society. And I think that actually fills a really important human part of us, this idea that we're contributing. So I reject this idea that there's work and leisure and those are the only two worlds. I think, in fact, given the opportunity, people do want to be engaged in something. So I don't really buy in too much of this idea that if we give people money to sit around and do nothing, they will permanently sit around and do nothing. However, we may have to start to look at the volunteer sector. And this is where community really comes into the conversation. Is there a way we could design a social contract in Canada whereby, you know, it's okay if you want to go on your universal basic income, working for pay maybe is not your thing, but there's an expectation on everybody that you at least contribute in some way, even if it's volunteer work. If your passion is fishing, that's okay, but why don't you put together a program where maybe you take underprivileged kids or families out on fishing trips and contribute in that way. If your passion is art, that's okay. Maybe you collect your UBI, but you put together an after-school art program for children that maybe otherwise would not be exposed to art. Just this idea that everyone, you know, there's an expectation that everyone is doing something of value, even if what you're doing doesn't have a market price to it. Even if what you're doing, you're not going to get paid for doing it, but find something that contributes, find something that participates in society, in our civic engagement, and maybe we need to come up with that sort of social contract, but that's a bigger conversation. But that's number two. I got to keep moving along. That's number two, this objection to a UBI because it kills ambition and it makes people lazy. And then the third objection to it, and again, I've got some, I understand the viewpoints in this one too. If what we're really trying to do is solve poverty, there are a lot of causes of poverty that don't have anything to do with money. And here we're talking about mental illness, we're talking about substance abuse, we're talking about some of the really saddest stories that we see. For reasons that aren't ours to judge, there's a lot of people who simply aren't able to manage money. And by giving them money hasn't really solved their problem. And what I worry about is, you know, maybe a generous UBI program which involves canceling other social income support programs and other kinds of social welfare programs, and leaves these people maybe with $1,000 in their bank account, but still absolutely no ability to function in society in a way that we would see as appropriate. Their problem isn't financial poverty, their problem is social poverty. That's a bigger problem, and I don't think it's one that can necessarily be solved with a UBI. A lot of advocates would say if we really want to solve poverty, what we need to do is maybe not just give people money, which they may or may not be able to manage properly, but provide more social services for free, particularly childcare, or maybe expand the scope of healthcare services or dental services, or all of these kinds of things that, you know, if you were going to be participating in society, you need these basic necessities of life, more affordable housing. So rather than giving people money, they would advocate give people what they need to live, because they may or may not be able to manage it. And they would also point out that not everybody lives in a social structure where they're going to have access to that money. And here you can think about a lot of, you know, primarily they would be females who live in a household where they're not going to have access to that check for $1,000 when it arrives. And that check is going to be taken by somebody else in the household, and they are not going to have access to that. Have we solved their problem? Maybe again, we need to look at providing more things for free. Now, the economist in me would object to that because governments they don't have a great track record in being able to allocate resources in a way that is appropriate. Here's where the market system and a price mechanism is really good at allocating things that results in less waste. If you just provide things for free, it's a great idea, but it often results in a tremendous amount of waste. And the example I always use when I'm teaching students or when I'm talking about a price mechanism, the very best example you can imagine, and most of you have been to a party or a wedding maybe, where it's the traditional host bar, where all the drinks are free. Just look around the room at the end of the evening, how much waste there is because there's no price for it. Now, if you have to hand over a payment, even if it's a loonie or a toonie, if you have to pay something for that drink, it results in far less waste. So in that way, the price mechanism, is better at allocating some resources. Just providing things for free is a great idea, but it can be extremely wasteful because governments may or may not know the appropriate amount to provide for free. So those are three kind of areas where people object to. Depending on the day, I may or may not have as much sympathy for them as normal or as I usually would. But I think those are the areas for the advocates of a UBI. And I'm sure a lot of you, especially at Basic Income Calgary, you've given a lot of thought to these objections. This is not the first time you've heard them. But for those who want to advocate for a UBI or a basic income, I think it's up to us to understand the arguments against it and be able to respond to those objections. So with that, I've used up my 15 minutes. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Matt, to moderate some questions, and I'll see how well I do.
Great. Thanks a lot, Todd. I appreciate it. Well, one of the first questions, I'm kind of tweaking what somebody put in the comments. So means testing is Victorian era for deserving. Can you expand on that, please?
Well, just this, and I know a lot of people, this is where their minds go to. Does that person deserve the $1,000? They come from a rich family. Why are we giving that kid, $1,000 a month? But we don't know, in fact, that kid's or that young adult, or, we don't know their relationship with their wealthy parents. Maybe their wealthy parents have cut them off because of whatever reason that, is none of really our business. We don't know what kind of situation that young adult may be in, but we make these assumptions. Oh, look at his parents. They've got lots of money. We don't know the individual situation. Again, you can think about somebody who maybe comes from a low-income household, but they might not live in poverty. They might have a really rich social network around them. And that's why, getting back to the conversation a little bit earlier, the low-income cutoff line and the word poverty, economists, we usually bristle when we hear the word poverty line, because you can be living below the low-income cutoff line, but not living in poverty. Poverty is a word that's loaded with all kinds of emotion and all kinds of, ideas about what it is. Then again, you can be living above the LICO, the low income cutoff, but because of maybe your situation, your inability to manage money, maybe some situations that again are no fault of your own, you might be living in circumstances that would resemble poverty. So I think it's important we make a distinction between low income cutoff and talking about poverty, because you may or may not be living in poverty. So again, means testing, well, are they living in poverty or not? We find ourselves in these impossible to answer questions about who is deserving. And we'll never ever really come up with a good way of assessing that. So I say just give everyone the $1,000 or whatever it's going to be and let them figure it out.
Perfect. So I'm looking at the time here. We got about 5 more minutes. So let's see if we can't quick fire through some of these questions, Todd. So it seems a few economists seem to have a perspective of social justice. Can you comment on some ways social justice has influenced your thinking?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I don't even know if I can give a brief answer to that. I mean, economists were trained in a certain way. And we're trained to think analytically, and we're trained in mathematical models. But a lot of these, and I think every economist would agree, they fall short when it comes to talking about social justice. So I think economists, it behooves us to say, well, here's what we can bring to the conversation But that's not the end of the conversation. The conversation also has to involve those who advocate for social justice, those who understand social systems, those who understand psychological processes, because we are more than, you know, economists. We talk about economic agents in our economy. It's very clinical, very kind of, you know, mechanistic, but we're not that way. We're human beings. So short answer, economists do have a lot to contribute to the conversation, but our answers and our models fall short when it comes to questions around social justice.
Okay. Question, the opposition to UBI seems ideological, and this person is sort of, they're saying, if the UCPs really wanted to eliminate red tape, then why are they dumping the problems created by the AISH and IS payment changes onto their workers?
Well, I'll leave that question for the Premier to answer because I'm not getting into that. But
okay, perfect. We're a society that has been encouraged to live on credit. So many are indebted to banks and credit unions. How do we live within our means again?
Well, as someone who works for a bank, I might be in dangerous territory. No, I mean, it's a valid point. And again, here I think is where we might need to step up the role of community. So, and I'll be short with this, a book I'm reading right now, it's called The Third Pillar by, I forget the author's name. He used to be the head of the IMF. He talks about the market economy. He talks about government. Those are two pillars in our society. And there's always this, you know, push and pull between those two. But the third pillar is community. And that's where it's been ignored. We've maybe neglected the importance of community and our interpersonal relationships. But I think that is where community we need to draw ourselves into tighter relationship with community to in fact prevent people from maybe being reckless with credit. I don't know if it's up to the government or even the market to do that. I think it's up to the role of community in our interpersonal relationships to help people manage money and help people manage credit appropriately. Are there more after-school programs that we can roll out in community to talk about how financial literacy, what does compound interest mean? Maybe this is a role for schools, I don't know. But I do think we need to be educating young people, and not even just young people, but the responsible use of credit and how it can get you into real trouble.
Perfect. Well, Todd, thank you for that. Thank you to everybody that was putting in questions. I'm really sorry we weren't able to get to all of your questions today. And Todd, my thanks again for joining us today, despite the orange look. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much. Everybody, I would like to introduce our last guest for today. I would like to introduce Marie Burge. And Marie was born in P.E.I. and is a staff member of the Cooper Institute Collective. She has 50 years experience in popular education, community development, participatory action, and she has a BA in history, B.Ed in psychology, and a master's in sociology. And currently, Marie's work with the Cooper Institute involves designing, organizing, and implementing specific community development and engagement programs to facilitate citizen involvement to influence public policy. She's especially involved in the preparation of information, interactive workshops, as well as media work around a basic income guarantee, fair employment insurance, and proportional representation for P.E.I. So please all welcome Marie to your screens. Marie, if you could please turn on your video and audio, and we'd like to welcome you. So while Marie's getting set up here, the intent is that we would have somebody that we are calling an advocate guest, someone who is advocating on the concept of basic income, not necessarily in the Calgary community, but somewhere. And in this case, Marie is joining us from P.E.I. Hello, Marie.
Hello, Matt.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for all your help getting this together and the anxieties that you had today as well. It was very graceful. Thank you.
No problem at all. I'll turn things over to you.
So, yeah. First of all, I just wanted to bring greetings from Prince Edward Island. It's a privilege to be in this, the first advocate guest, actually, because this is the beginning of a series. But hopefully the basic income guarantee will continue and do this kind of work. So let's talk right up front about poverty and P.E.I. and you know, taking into consideration what we just heard from Todd. There are 17% of the people in Prince Edward Island live in poverty, in physical, financial poverty. And that to us means deprived of necessities of life. They're deprived of dignity. We consider that another 20% are hovering precariously around the, you know, the poverty line, however we want to talk about that. But there's a large block of people in P.E.I. that are in precarity all the time. And you'll notice that we mention children and people with disabilities as people who are particularly vulnerable. Next slide. Next. So this is some of our history. In 2003, Cooper Institute established the P.E.I. Working Group for Livable Income. We were never an anti-poverty group. We were always a livable income group, and that the distinction is really important to us. From the beginning, the working group proposed basic income as the long-term solution. In 2013, we implemented a campaign for basic income guarantee, which we called CBIG P.E.I. Our goal is to establish BIG and P.E.I. as a province-wide, fully funded program with provincial, federal partnership, and as part of a national endeavor. Next. Our main framework, how we work, is a framework that we just call engagement. It's not very original, but so we look at engaging people, and this is not just about knowledge. I know there's something at the beginning of this webinar. It isn't just knowledge. It's how do we encourage each other to act in collective action, for sure. So we just decided that the community would be our major group that we would work with, and so we crisscrossed the island. We put on many participatory forums and presentations, and out of this grassroots work, we came up with our statement of principles and a fairly clear picture of what big could look like in our province. Next. Another part of our engagement has to do with politicians and policymakers and the media. We're small, therefore we have exceptional access to policymakers and the media. It's nothing for us to walk down the street in Charlottetown and meet the Premier in the street and have a chat. We have met with Premier, Premier, not the current one, many ministers and party caucuses. We provide formal submissions, and we have informal conversations with them as well. One of the results, although we can't claim credit for this alone, but it did happen on our watch, and that is that the P.E.I. Legislative Assembly twice voted unanimously to move forward on basic income. And that happened in December 2016 and last year, July 2019. Next. So our big idea, and we love the name of that, of course, with big ideas. We advocate for basic income guarantee that delivers benefits and is based on income level. So sorry about that, Todd, but that's what we're going for in P.E.I. People living on low income will receive a top up to a livable level so that all residents can live just fuller lives. Basic income guarantee invests in people, and part of that is having their basic needs met. Next. The Canada Coalition, of which Basic Income Canada, P.E.I, big, is involved, was launched in November 2019, and it is actually advocating for Prince Edward Island to become launch site for a permanent, fully funded federal provincial big program in PEI. This was initiated, by the way, by Kingston, Ontario big group. It didn't come from PEI. PEI's size, we're only 158,000 people and easy to get along with, makes such a project feasible both in terms of costs and as an opportunity for close-up evaluation. It will be an experiment, and in an experiment we want to look at the benefits, we want to look at the the obstacles, the problems, and so on, and work some of those out, improving the system as we go. Next, please. Our vision is a PEI where everyone has a livable income, all residents. Our goal is to develop a community-driven plan for implementing basic income guarantee for all of PEI and, as a matter of fact, for all of Canada. Next. So we invite you to follow us and to join us in our attempt to strengthen the big movement in Canada. It is a movement, and it's becoming more and more obvious as weeks go by that there is a movement, and it's a groundswell that's happening right now like never before. So we have some websites there that you can look at. So be well, stay safe, and be full of well-grounded hope. Thank you very much.
Marie, thank you very much. We appreciate you being able to join us today. So thank you so much, and be well. And I hope everyone, as part of CBIG, is hopefully enjoying some spring by this time. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So in closing, we have a few actions for you, our participants that registered for today. I will be putting up a webinar poll at the end. There is a newsletter that you can sign up for at basicincomealberta.ca, as well as you can show your support, if you support Basic Income, to Basic Income Canada by visiting basicincomecanada.org/support. Again, everyone will be getting a copy of these slides, and they have the URLs, as well as everyone will be receiving links to the recordings from today's session. What we have next is I would like to send some thanks out. Obviously, Basic Income Calgary and Enough for All, thank you very much for presenting this. Todd Hirsch, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. Marie as well, thank you for being our inaugural advocate guest from PEI. To the team that was working in the BI Fundamentals breakout room, Ben Patmore, Brad Robertson, Colleen, thank you so much. I know we were having some technical difficulties today. There's some technical challenges with Basic Income, so we wanted to also show some technical challenges with our Zoom call today. And also to Lee Stevens with BI Plus, the inclusion support from Disability Action Hall, thank you so much for allowing us to have ASL as well as closed captioning today. Our ASL interpreter, Debra Russell, thank you so much. And our captioner as well, Diane LeBlanc. And everyone behind the scenes, Cesar, Colleen, Hajir, Kurt, Mike, and Wendy, thank you very much. I am going to be popping up the poll. So please do take, it'll be a very quick poll. Please, we do appreciate everybody providing their feedback and input. And I hope you enjoyed our first go at this. We're very much looking forward to putting on more of these in the near future. So thank you very much. And I will put up that poll right now.